The Tale of George, the Brave Monkey. Once upon a time, in a lush, vibrant jungle, there lived a monkey named George. George is a regular monkey. He was gentle, smart, and generous, always ready to lend a helping hand to his fellow animals. You see, George was special in many ways. Unlike the other animals, he could use his hands and feet to grab things, and his small, long tail was incredibly useful, too. He could climb the tallest trees and reach the ripest fruits that others could only dream of tasting. Unlike the one-eyed tiger named Mr. Eddie, he grabbed things with his mouth, using his claws only to attack. Sometimes he used his arms when he ate. There was also an elephant named Mr. Jerry, who was known as the lumberjack of the jungle, who could carry huge trees with his trunk, something George could never do. One sunny day, George was sitting under his favorite tree, about to enjoy a juicy apple. Suddenly, he saw Mr. Roger, the lion, approaching with his son, Sebastian. Now, Mr. Roger had been quite mean to George in the past and often acted like an enemy. But today, he looked different. He seemed friendly and had a kind smile on his face. "Hello there, George," Mr. Roger said. "I'm sorry for how I treated you in the past. I know I was mean, but I've changed. Look, I have a son now, and he really likes you." George, being the kind-hearted monkey he was, replied, "Hello, Roger. Let's forget about the old times. How can I help you?" Mr. Roger said, "I admire your skills, George. You can do many things that other animals can't. I'm here to ask if you could train my son, Sebastian, to be like you. Can you help?" George looked at little Sebastian, goofing around, acting like a monkey. George thought for a moment and then said, "All right, Roger. It will be a hard task, but I'll do my best. I'll train him for 1 month." And so, the training began. The first lesson was how to capture an apple. Sebastian found it very hard. He used his claws to stick the apple instead of using his fingers like George. But George encouraged him, saying, "That's better than nothing." George taught Sebastian many things, like catching objects with his tail and jumping to catch a stick that George made for the training lessons. Unlike George's, he still tried his best. The training sessions were filled with laughter and fun, and a strong friendship blossomed between George and Sebastian. 1 month later, Mr. Roger returned. George and Sebastian were excited to show him what they had learned. "Did you teach him everything?" Mr. Roger asked. "As I promised, I taught him everything he needed to learn," George replied. Mr. Roger smiled and looked at his son, and said with a low, gentle voice, "Kill him." In an instant, Sebastian's demeanor changed. He turned into a fierce lion, and George was in shock. All the friendship they had built over the past month seemed to vanish in a blink of an eye. Sebastian attacked George with his claws, slicing through the stick George was holding. George had no choice but to run. He leaped over stones, crawled under rocks, and used every trick he had taught Sebastian to escape. But Sebastian knew all these tricks too, and was hot on his trail. Finally, George came up with an idea. He ran to the closest apple tree and climbed it. Sebastian, not knowing how to climb, was left at the base of the tree, watching George with disappointment and anger. Mr. Roger approached and said, "Well, George, it seems you forgot to teach my son something important. Why didn't you teach him to climb trees?" George, catching his breath, replied, "You think I'm stupid? I remembered how mean you were to me. By the way, I also forgot to teach your son something else. Now, watch this." George picked an apple and threw it at Mr. Roger, hitting him on the head. Shocked, Mr. Roger stepped back. George picked another apple and threw it at Sebastian, hitting him on the back. Both lions realized that George was not someone to mess with and quickly ran away. From that day on, whenever Mr. Roger and Sebastian got close to George, he would climb the nearest tree and throw whatever he could find at them. They learned to keep their distance, and George remained the brave, kind monkey who always stayed one step ahead. And so, dear friends, the tale of George teaches us an important lesson. Always be careful and never completely trust someone who has been mean to you in the past. People can change, but it's wise to stay cautious and protect yourself.